It's time to refocus ourselves on what we mean by morality. Hi, this is Michael Shevack, and welcome to Godsearch. Are you alive? If you are alive. You are on a search, and you are on a search to experience what's called happiness. Happiness. The ancient Greeks called that eudaimonia, good gods. You're on a God search. If you want to be happy, you're looking on how to integrate your mind, your body, your your feelings, your desires, your ambitions, your animal hungers, all of this and integrate it into your humanity so that they work and create good. Shrink that down, get rid of one of the zeros, and you have the experience called God. Now, morality has become the buzzword on all spiritual seeking because morality has been the dominant preoccupation of religious movements, especially the Catholic Church, which drew on its heritage from the prophetic sacred history of the Hebrews and Judaism, and they created a system which really became the structural norm for the entire world. The morality became equivalent to spirituality, and spirituality became equivalent to morality. But what we see in this era is that that problem is now surfacing, which is why, just as we spoke at the very beginning of Godsearch, people are not using the R word for religion. They are using the S word for spirituality. Spirituality includes individuality, free choice, free will. It is not as laden with control of sexual desires as was religious morality in the past. So spirituality becomes more comfortable to people. But I want to address the moral dilemma that we are all facing that divides us between religion and spirituality. And that is morality. Now, I think it's very appropriate after searching and searching and searching for the right focus in this apartment in which to record. I finally found a way with my wife to re-engineer this entire living room and find a way to relax, get good lighting. I hope this is good lighting. If not, I can improve it and actually get good environment and not be so tight on my face. So I consider this refocus on Godsearch to be symbolic of the refocus that we need to do in general and simplify things. So, as I tend to do, I tend to like to address difficult theological issues with extreme cases. Because if I present extreme cases to reveal the dilemmas in them, then I know what is underneath the lesser cases. The lesser cases. So here is an exercise which I touched upon in an earlier Godsearch, and I want to return to it. Imagine, and this may be distasteful to some people, so I do apologize, bear with me. You have a situation where a woman is giving birth. God bless. It's a happy, joyful event. Someone walks into the room, takes the baby, and it turns out that person is a cannibal. And that person takes the baby away from the mother and has lunch. Forgive me, this may be distasteful. It is a moral disgrace, but I am using it as what Einstein called a thought experiment. Worse, this person decides that that he will eat the baby in front of the mother when the mother is dying to see the newborn baby, is hungering to hold the baby, and her actual body is reshaping itself to suckle the baby. Okay. And she has to bear witness to this. Now, there is not a person out there that will tell me that this isn't a horrible act. Actually, I think it's one of the most horrible acts I've ever thought up in my mind as an example of bad morality, because you are violating the baby, you are violating the mother, you are torturing the mother on the second variation of it. You're destroying the father and the family and these siblings and the entire fabric of society, because the fabric of society is designed to protect each individual soul that happens to have a body, meaning it's an enfleshed soul, and it happens to be a citizen of a certain nation. And that's morality, if you take a look very closely of it, protects individuality. Now, let me illustrate how clear that is. Here is the dilemma. This cannibal who does something because he has a hunger, okay? But then this cannibal who is a sadistic cannibal, not just feeding his hunger, but now decides to torture this woman, clearly does something which violates individuality. If you are concerned about the abortion issue, where a fetus is a living being, this is even more so because you're taking a fully grown born baby. There's very little doubt. But here's the irony. It's not just irony, it goes to the core of morality. This cannibal is nourished. The cannibal actually receives nourishment that feeds his corporeal life. Now, if you believe in God, and that God is good, and that morality is good, and something as egregious as cannibalism is bad, especially to a newborn baby, and especially one that is emotionally torturing the mother, you now have a tremendous dilemma. How can God nourish this cannibal in the act of doing something which is so horrible? This is a more drastic example of why do good things happen to bad people. But it's clear on what we're dealing with, because on a earthly, natural, organic level, this person's body is fed and nourished. On the level of an individual human being who has individuality, which might be described as a soul, and is a citizen and is a member of the family and is valued in its individuality, we have a conflict. Now, in nature, oftentimes bunny rabbits, go about doing their everyday life, and they have very, very few natural defenses. And wolves go for the bunny rabbits, and the bunny rabbits really don't have many defenses at all, but they've been inspired to reproduce at enormous rates so that the bunny rabbit species continues. Unfortunately, the individual bunny oftentimes does not. And that is pretty much wholesale on the earthly natural level, is that this species is favored at the loss of the individual. That takes place, of course, in wars and other situations of challenges. But in the issue of morality, we are saying that the individual is loved, respected, cared for, and valued. And that is the critical distinction. So we have now two levels that seem to be in conflict. A natural level, which nourishes, in general, the human species. It's designed to do that bodily. But that natural level is in conflict with the individuality, no differently for the human being I'm going to say that again, no differently for the human being than for the bunny rabbit or for other creatures. The miraculous thing about the concept of morality is the concept of the distinctness and uniqueness of the individual. Now, I've said in the past that the human being has more muscles in his or her or their face that create more unique positions and more unique smiles and more unique ways of it having expression than any other creature. We are born and designed or evolved to create more sense of individuality. If you take a look at the differences between human beings in species and the differences of other creatures within their species, you will see an incredible display of individuality and even divergencies, because uniqueness is a fact of human beings. Now, the illustration here is very important. If you create, and this goes right to the heart of something you may be suffering from, many of us think that if we do something bad and we create a mistake, we've done something really, truly horrible and egregious, that God is going to condemn us and destroy us and wipe us out. Okay? Well, think about the illustration I gave. If a cannibal of babies is nourished, is any particular act of morality so absolutely contrary to the entirety of the laws of existence that it is banished to some kind of self-inflicted hell that plagues the person, that the person can't go on living, where they live in chronic depression? No. How is that possible logically? Think about it. If the act of something as egregious as baby cannibalism nourishes its perpetrator, you must come to the conclusion that if in this case, even in this case, good came from that act, you have to declare that certainly for lesser goods, good would come from it. For lesser evils, good would come from it. You have to come to that conclusion. You must also come to the conclusion that excessive moral condemnation of anyone for an act, right, clearly black and white, nothing in between, excluded middles, is an excess of the human mind. An excess of the human mind. Morality is an excess of the human mind. It takes something like cannibalism, which has a good aspect of it and clearly a negative aspect, one which nourishes the species body and the individual's body, but which is a destruction of the individual and a destruction of their body, as well as tearing apart the fabric of the family and by extension, the entire society. You have that kind of tension, but in no way can you declare the cannibalism 100% to have no natural goodness in it, no ontology of goodness in it. The idea of making God so perfectly good that there is no room for evil, or having a God which is just nature, and that which it takes place is fine because God permitted it to take place. Therefore, cannibalism must be good because otherwise it wouldn't exist, or God would condemn it, since God does everything, creates this enormous conundrum. And we have a very difficult time of escaping unless this notion of a one God who is absolutely flawlessly perfect, is tempered. We have to temper it because you have to clearly distinguish between what is good and what is nutritive according to the laws of earthly nature, and what is good and supportive and harmonious for a human civilization that prizes the value of an individual, of an individual. Take this in. You must have two views. Even though you might wish to have one God, a perfect God of creation and a perfect God of morality, and believe that everything that takes place is good because it took place, therefore God ordered it into existence and therefore it must be good, or you have to come to the conclusion that there is a level called the natural and a level called the moral. They deal with two different specific levels of life. And these levels of life do not mesh perfectly well. It's kind of like if you go to a doctor and you get a shot to relieve, you need an antibiotic, you need to have an injection, and it causes you pain to your body, which many people would consider to be an evil, but it's devoted to good for the sake of the individual surviving. Once again, there is a conflict between the God of nature on earth, or let's say the universe, where you explode a planet. Well, that's part of the creation of a galaxy, right? Or you have the loss of a sun in a solar system. Well, that's part of the creation. But in that process, you might lose individuals with individual identities. There is a distinction that must be made between morality, because it is individually focused, and nature, which is focused on the larger scale and terrain of creation itself, including species which are involved tightly in the cyclings of earthly nature, and therefore they do not have the emergent individuality that human beings do. Now, there are many ways that this duality becomes injected. I prefer to do it by distinguishing between an earthly natural and a moral natural, which is a human being's individuality. That's how some people do it. In the book of Genesis, you will see that the first chapter of Genesis uses the term Elohim, which is a plural word often translated as gods or angels or masters. And it uses a singular noun because it's just saying all the different aspects and dynamics of all the aspects within divinity itself are fully present. In the second chapter of Genesis, you have a God that has a name, and that name would, forgive me for those Orthodox Jews who are out there who do not speak the Tetragrammaton, the four-letter name of God. It's sometimes called Yahweh. It's translated as Lord, and it is an individual God. It has an individual personality. It is part of the God of human civilization. You'll see all of the commands in the Bible around individuality and morality. They all spring from the four-letter term for God, which is Yahweh, and is the God of the revelation of the Torah too. So that's how the Bible does it. Now, if you take the individual sense of morality, meaning what is right for the individual, and you take and you say, well, the only way that we're going to heal the rift between individual morality and nature is for the human morality and our human systems to become so absolutely perfect that they kind of overarch the earthly nature of everything and raise it to a new level so that that kind of natural, evil, the cannibalism that nurtures, is removed. It's triumphed over. Well, that is exactly why in many moral systems which are taken to their extreme in terms of abstract thinking, you have moral systems that have to take over the entire world, moral systems that become universal, if not ubiquitous, for every single culture in the world, moral systems that are become eternal, fixed, and triumphant for all time. You begin to get messianic viewpoints where the human individuality that is behind moral systems now has to be extrapolated over time and reach kind of a curve of increasing perfection so that any kind of voluntary evil, such as cannibalism, is no longer part of the human design. And you also have systems that progress to the point where the human design itself is negated, where you have life and death as being negated, where materiality is negated, and it becomes ascendant and becomes one with the substance of God's consciousness. And you also have the possibility in more contemporary amalgams of the human being evolving and becoming more cosmic and perhaps growing and evolving and being reborn into other planetary systems that may be more advanced and more suitable for bodies which are more evolved, and where this kind of moral dilemma doesn't exist as much. Whatever is the issue, you will see in moral systems that dominate religions an attempt to keep the importance of austere, solid laws, perfect laws. And the only way to solve the problem of the fact that these perfect laws do not fit with life on the earth and they don't fit well with earthly nature, the only way to solve that is for there to be some kind of mystical or spiritual or evolutionary transformation of human life so that earthly natural life becomes subsumed under human moral life and you have the perfect world. It's kind of like an electric car. We create a car that's a mess. It doesn't abide with nature. And then we evolve the car so it becomes electrical. Well, the same thing happens where the human being has to become transcendent to the earth, and the earth has to become transcendent under the human being to a different kind of earth, a new earth, so we can solve this moral dilemma. And another way this is solved, and when you go to that extreme where you're imagining the reality of a perfected moral system, the reality of a messianic perfection, the reality of a perfect king, and a morality of a perfect, evolution of humanity. The only way in the meantime that you can handle the justification for all of these evils is with that hyper perfection and hyper goodness that one is imagining. One must also create a counterpart, which is a hyper evil, a satanic principle, an asuric principle, to which you can explain the duality, which is a simple part of the fact that the natural order on earth is not the same thing as the moral order. Elohim which is the name for God in the first chapter of Genesis, is not the same as Yahweh in the second chapter of Genesis. The more you try to make everything into an idealistic human system, the more you need to create and emphasize the diabolic in order to bring balance. And it is curious that in a lot of the mythologies, the angelology, around good angels and bad angels. It's very curious that Satan is, of course, identified with the beast, as in the book of Revelations. Satan is identified with the tempting serpent in the Garden of Eden story. Why? Because that is a more rarefied conceptual ideal, which is stating the same thing, that there are natural evils upon the earth, the beast, natural animal evils upon the earth. Sometimes theologies will idealize them into what seems to be mythic structures, or which multiplies consciousnesses that may be good or evil, and there is good and evil consciousnesses. There are, beings up there that are not exactly desirable, okay? And there are better ones that are part of the fabric of consciousness. But the issue of distinguishing God from the beast, all right, God from the beast, is the same fundamental issue as the fact that nature is not individualized. Human nature is individualized, and the morality that comes into play when individuality is brought into the spiritual economy of evolution is different than the morality that's in place when we're just dealing with general nature on the earth and species. Now, what is the meaning of this? First of all, go to yourgodsearch.com and send me an email, because everyone suffers from this. Everyone is overly critical of morality, overly critical of other people, overly critical of themselves, and they split themselves and make their lives much harder. And I want to hear from you. But what this means is, A, the duality around making moral decisions so absolutely perfect, so absolutely rigid, black and white with absolutely no gray, even on something like cannibalism, is false. It is an absolute because we do need to control those natural hungers and natural impulses and natural creativities so they do not interfere with the right, by divine right, of each individual psyche, which represents the soul's thinking processes, to have his, her, their own existence. In the area of moral law, which is there to protect the sacredness of the individual, and you'll see in the second chapter of Genesis, you have the emergence of individuality, whereas in the first chapter, you do not have individuality. But in the emergence of individuality, those moral laws become sacred and absolute, because without them in place, we have no guidelines to protect people from others who are too creative, too natural, too self-motivated, and too much taking advantage of the freedom and creativity that is built into the plastic nature of everyday human, of the everyday earthly life. There's a lot more freedom in there that we tolerate in a human society, where we like to restrict the rain. We like to make sure that we control the elements. There's a lot more wild and woolly times that's going on in nature. Where those strict moral laws come into play, and the strictness is necessary, is not just moral pronouncements, but particularly in their translation into legal principles by which our society can be governed, and by which the order in which we live together can take place in a way where we protect people from excessive behavior. And that is why all of these moral problems that people are having with religions, and why they're leaving religions and going to spirituality, because they're bringing in freedoms that the moral systems had become too excessive and denied. Well, this is why people are running away from the S word and going to the S, or the R word and going to the S word. They're dealing with spirituality and not religion. But the morality for pronouncements of clear lines where the violation of the individuality of that baby's birth by cannibalism is declared wrongful because society is there to protect the sacredness of individual conscience. Individual conscience. And as a legal principle, it is necessary for us to have a human civilization which is evolving in nature, and for the individual as a spiritual component, as an entity, to be safeguarded and protected so we can continue our God search and continue to evolve. Without those moral and legal restraints that religion took the lion's share of, thrust to put into our world, everything would tumble. We cannot be merely natural creatures without losing a sense of individuality. That's the big fear that takes place when you tear down religion, where you make everything a naturalist system. And this is, by the way, the fundamental battle between the red team and the blue team. The red team doesn't want the naturalist, or the more feminine aspect of the natural, to be dominant without adequately maintaining the critical importance of moral and legal issues. Now, there are all sorts of, gray areas, which are the, abortion areas and the extent to which capitalism becomes a dominant thrust. These are all things that need to be discussed. But the fundamental issue between the fact that nature is one aspect of behavior and individuality is another. And when you put individuality together in a group, you get morality, and then you get legality. These are all parts of human life. You will not escape it by going merely to S. You'll just handle it on an individual level, which is important. It will be your personal God search. And you're not going to handle it by going all the way to extreme religious dogmatics, which is going to deny the right of an individual to express their own personal natures in ways that may be variant in minor degrees from the moral principles. Here you wind up with all of the debates around sexuality and sexual preferences and the confusions that are taking place. So the most important thing is to take the judgment, the extreme personal and behavioral judgments of pure evil versus pure good that has contaminated our moral thinking. There is no moral act that is so horrific that it has no good in it or no potential for good. It does not exist. You can spend a lifetime looking for it, but you won't find it. All right, go ahead and try it. All right. And if you find it, let me know, because I'll change my thinking. I've tried it for over 10 years of my life. I have never found it. There is none. And because of that, we should emotionally remove this excessive condemnation, this excessive religionism, which is injected into our thinking with an excessive kind of heaven versus hell, damned versus saved, which is destroying our minds, because these are wars that come from the excessive idealism, the excessive idea of a perfect God that is not real. And then we have to add into that enemies in order to rebalance that excessively good God with something that gives it the normal texture of life. There is in life relative good and relative evil. There is the possibility of a higher good that embraces lower goods, and a higher good that includes lower levels of evil, which are simply less good. Evil on a relative plane is simply less good, and more is simply less evil. That's why they're relative. There are there are goods, there are higher goods. The moral system and the moral dilemma between the human being as an individual in society or as a natural creature can be improved. It can be improved. The first step is to remove the excessive hatred of evil, the excessive hatred, the excessive war to annihilate evil. That only creates more evil because it adds evil to the evil and perpetuates the dilemma inside out, where the evil is now a tool for ideal good, and we have not eliminated the evil, which is the desire to exterminate out of proper context. So let me make that clear again. The more we attack what is an evil, whether it is a terrorist, whether these days it's a Jew, which is very popular these days, the more we attack a Republican, the more we attack a feminist, the more we do that, the more we are injecting excessively moralistic thinking into life. And even if we're on the right side, the attack itself brings in an evil that will find its way back to the perpetrator. And this may be scary, but I want to leave you with this thought. Is it happenstance that after the United States had become excessively religious and religionist and started to condemn religions that were out there that were not protecting core biblical revelation as they understood it? Is it merely happenstance that at that time we were attacked by excessive religionists from another place, 9/11? Is that merely happenstance? Did we attack certain orders of religious thinking and then receive that back? I'll just leave you with that thought, because that's where the teachings of what goes around comes around. As you sow, so you reap. Since everything, good and evil, are relative within a good, which is larger than anything else, which none of us know what it is completely. But here on Godsearch, it's a search. So keep searching for it. Keep searching for good. There are answers, and if they are not absolute, you can get massive improvement. First step, be very careful of ideas that are at war, and be very careful of feeding that war for your own purposes, because it will undermine you and undermine the world that you're in. This is Michael Shevack. Thank you so much for being on Godsearch, and thank you for enjoying my new reframing in this living room, which has been an ordeal to find. I hope that this teaching on morality is itself a reframing for you. Be easy on yourself. If you make a mistake, don't condemn yourself like you're going to burn in hell, right? Not good. See you next week, Wednesday, 5:45 a.m. It's usually posted. And God bless. Uncover God, discover God, and please recover from very, very dangerous religious philosophy that divides you and makes you unwhole. Be whole. The world is designed to be whole with all its confusing little textures and parts. It's still designed to be whole, better than whole, a unity. God bless. Bye-bye.